Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Marshall. I'm the Partner Marketing Specialist here at Greenhouse, and we're so thrilled you can join us on this Hiring Hacks webinar. Today, Hiring Hacks will share an inside look into Coinbase's recruiting approach. But before we dive into the presentation, I wanted to share a few minutes to go over some housekeeping items. First and foremost, this webinar will be recorded and available for on-demand viewing. You'll receive an email the next day letting you know how to access the recording, and you can also share that link with your team or anyone else who may have missed the live event. You'll also see in the webinar console some things called widgets at the bottom of your screen. There's a resource widget that has a handful of helpful information and best practices from Coinbase, HackerRank, and Greenhouse. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through the webinar. There's a Q&A box on the right-hand side of the slide window. And if you don't see it, just select Q&A from the bottom of the widget tray, and it should maximize. We'll be taking time at the end to go through questions. Any issues for me, just chat them into the Q&A window. Without further ado, let's get started. So today's moderators is myself, Casey Marshall, and Tom Nickel. He's the Product Marketing Manager here at HackerRank. So what is Hiring Hacks? The Hiring Hacks series is presented by Greenhouse. And Greenhouse, for those of you who do not know, is an end-to-end recruiting optimization platform helping companies get better at recruiting. This Hiring Hacks series focuses on strategies and tools that help measurably improve the recruiting process and outcomes. In this Hiring Hacks, Greenhouse partnered with HackerRank to discuss the recruiting approach at Coinbase, including the work trial process, technical recruiting strategies such as referral programs and tapping into your user base, unique ways to attract talent, like developing the reputation and network of your engineering leads, best practices in creating an exceptional candidate experience, and lastly, scaling culture, hiring people who are genuinely passionate about your product. Let me introduce you to Tom as he'll share some insights and a quick introduction into HackerRank.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. Once again, my name is Tom Nickel. I'm a Product Marketing Manager here at HackerRank. It's always a pleasure to be here on the Greenhouse Hiring Hacks webinar series. It's a great webinar series on all things recruiting and tech recruiting. So just some quick background information on HackerRank, what we do, so that when Aurora talks about it, you'll have a little bit more context. At the end of the day, we like to think what's the difference between a bad hire and a great hire. HackerRank is going to help you make that difference. We really focus on 3 tenets of tech recruiting: sourcing, screening, and interviewing. On the sourcing side, we've got a community of about 1 million active developers who come to our website to take lots of fun challenges that are programming related. And through either code sprints or company pages, we allow you to source from this very passionate developer community. On the screening side, we use code challenges, which is a way for any recruiter to find out exactly what a candidate's programming aptitude may be. And on the interview side, we have a tool called Code Pair, which combines a live video chat with live coding, so you can see exactly what kind of coding chops and personality that candidate has. And why is this all advantageous? The reason HackerRank works is because it really helps you ensure that you're speaking and following up with the most qualified programming candidates. It's a strategic advantage to find candidates who maybe don't appear like a great fit just based on their resume, but actually are quite awesome programmers. We have a lot of fun stories about finding coders who were working as like dishwashers in Spain, or other kind of like fun random roles that might have screened them out originally, but they're by completing a HackerRank code challenge, we were able to really assess how good they were. It's also going to improve your process and reduce your time to hire. When you can talk to fewer, more skilled candidates, it's a lot less time interviewing on your end. And of course, you can drive candidates to the top of your funnel by engaging with our over 1 million engineers on the HackerRank community by code sprints and company pages. So that's a quick little heads up on what HackerRank does. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the star of today's show. That's Aurora Harshner. She's a recruiting manager over at Coinbase. She's been here in the Silicon Valley for a good amount of time now. She's worked at some pretty awesome places that I'm sure you've heard of. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Aurora to finish up the rest of this awesome webinar. So thank you, Casey, and thank you, Aurora.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you, everybody, for taking a little time out of your busy days to come and hear me speak a little bit about Coinbase and our recruiting strategy. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is kind of talk through some things that I think are really exceptional about Silicon Valley. Now, one of my favorite things about being here is that, really there's something for absolutely everybody. You have all these really incredibly talented, intelligent people who are attracted to Silicon Valley to work on stuff that they're really passionate about. There's a plethora of different places that you can work that appeal to your specific passion. And so what do I mean by that? If you are an engineer, for example, and you're passionate about the sharing economy, you could work at Uber. You could also work at Airbnb. Another place that you could work if you're passionate about EdTech is Clever. Or if you're passionate about the financial technology space, you could work at Square, Stripe, or Coinbase, right? The main point of all of this is that, in a place like Silicon Valley, there are so many incredible companies to work for, and if you really want to stand out and attract talent to your company, you really have to pay attention to small details and really set your recruiting process apart. And so what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit more about what Coinbase does to really kind of level us up and really stand out. My goal at the end of this is for all of you to walk away with maybe one or two things that you aren't doing yet that could improve your process, or maybe something that you could put a little bit more emphasis on to really make your entire recruiting process that much better and help you and your company stand out among all of the incredible companies and opportunities there are here in Silicon Valley. So taking a step back and looking at what our story is. So the Coinbase story. Basically, some of you guys may be aware, but Brian Armstrong, our co-founder and CEO, prior to Coinbase, he was actually at Airbnb, which is where I met him. And he was an individual contributing engineer there. And something that he really learned there was what it looks like to really make the tough decisions and hire and really raise the bar. I think that it's no secret that Airbnb has an incredible culture out there, and they've done that through, making really tough decisions. And when he was there, he went through the process of, interviewing people, and they desperately needed help. And they would find people who had great skill set, but not everybody in the entire on the hiring team was 100% yes. And so they would pass on people unless everybody was basically a hell yes. And it's painful to make those sacrifices and really pass on people who could be good. But I think in the immediate time, he would look at it, and sometimes it was hard to understand. But then taking a step back 6 months to a year later, you look back at the company that's been built, and you have this incredible culture. You have an incredible team of people that you love working with, and you realize that the sacrifices were really worth it, right? So naturally, when he left Airbnb to go start his own company, he thought about the best recruiter he could find who would understand what it really meant and what it felt like to truly make those sacrifices and understand that devotion to raising the bar. And so he looked at his recruiter who brought him into Airbnb, Barry Kwok. So Barry and Brian and Fred, who is the other co-founder of Coinbase, basically worked tirelessly in 2013 to build out the core team of Coinbase. And after they got to about 7 people, that was the point when the company was about to receive their Series B round of funding. And they realized, all right, well, we really need to grow. We need to expand quickly. Who else can we pull that would understand this need to really keep a devotion to excellence and understand what that looks and feels like and understand kind of the pain is worth it? So they looked to Airbnb once again, and they recruited me. So basically, Barry and I worked over the next several months and, really focused on finding the best candidates and providing an exceptional experience for candidates. But after we got to about 25, 28 people, we couldn't do it with just the 2 of us. So at that point, we hired Brittany Oliver, and the 3 of us have worked tirelessly over the past year to really build out Coinbase and to develop a process that is exceptional, that really helps us find the best people out there. So I'm going to share with you a little bit more on what that looks like and how that's developed. Now, to start, I think one of the things that I'm really proud of that I think is really exceptional about Coinbase is that the way that we approach recruiting is really as a partnership. Now, this comes from developing a good relationship with the founders, and also the founders really trusting the recruiting knows what they're doing. Another company I know that's really famous for this is Netflix, and that they really empower the recruiters to make decisions not just on placing people into the roles, but making that tough decision on, is this the right person for the company? And in some cases, that means sitting down with the hiring team and having a very in-depth conversation about, is this person going to be the right fit for us now, 6 months, or a year out? And in some cases, that means walking away from candidates if they're not the right fit for the company. And I think it's something it really empowers recruiters, and it's something that I really appreciate about being here at Coinbase. Now, another element is education. So it's really important to focus on this up front. You know, I joined the company when we were about 8 people, and really putting that time in up front to educate the employees on how to recruit, how to interview, and what a good candidate experience looks like, even down to filling out feedback. You know, once employees develop a bad habit of not filling out feedback right away or not showing up to interviews on time, you know, it really makes it much more challenging to change that once the company starts growing. So really investing in teaching employees what good recruiting looks like up front is going to save you a lot of time, and as you scale, it will really pay off. Now, another thing that is very unique, I think, to Coinbase, there's a few other companies that I've heard of that do this, but it's called the work trial. Now, admittedly, when I joined the company, I thought this was crazy because often we were asking people to take a week off of work to come in and work with us. So that meant taking PTO and coming in to work with the company, and you may or may not get the job at the end of the process. But as I worked through this process, and you know, every single person at the company goes through this process, whether it's somebody who's coming in as a coordinator or a receptionist, all the way up to a VP of finance. And you know, this really allows you to minimize the mistakes that you're going to make. Anybody can be a really solid interviewer and come in and rock their on-site interviews because essentially they're only having to be really on and present a certain side of themselves. But when you take them out of that and you put them into a real live work experience, and you have them work on projects and collaborate with your employees, you get to see how they think, how they problem solve. You get to see if you like them. Is there a good dynamic and synergy with the team? But also on the candidate side, it gives them a chance to see, do I like these people? Is this a culture that I fit in with? They have lunch and dinner with the company, and they really get a sense of, is this a place that I want to be longer term? And you know, aside from it being a great evaluation tool with both the company as well as the candidate, at the end of the day, if the candidate is excited about the company, it's a fantastic selling tool because people join companies that have people that they trust, that they have good connections with. And when somebody spends, you know, a few days or up to a week working with employees, they trust them more. And so if you end up wanting to move forward with a candidate, it works as a very, very powerful selling tool. So obviously, you know, it's definitely a logistical challenge doing this, and we get creative with the work trial process from, you know, doing a few days up to a week, but overall it's really helped us a lot in finding the right talent and maintaining that. So I also, candidate experience, I think that's an extremely important thing to really think through. Just because with going back to the fact that there are so many different companies that are out there that we're competing with, you know, you really have to make sure that you're providing an exceptional candidate experience, especially when with the majority of people, you end up not moving forward. And so this is an opportunity to either have that person leave your process and, you know, spread positivity, and even though they didn't get the job, to say, you know what, I was really inspired by that team. Or on the flip side, it could be a opportunity for somebody to say a lot of negative things. So I think this is a simple way to really allow people to walk away with a good experience. And then lastly, just communication. I think overall this is something that you can never put enough attention on, and it's something that breaks down in all companies at some point. And just really driving that communication and setting up front expectations with the candidate, setting up front expectations with the hiring team, and kind of making sure that all of the interviewers are communicating throughout the process on, you know, what we can push on if they miss something in the candidate when they're interviewing the candidate, and allowing the next interviewer to jump in and ask a question about, you know, X, Y, or Z. And that way you're minimizing having to do maybe a follow-up phone screen after the on-site, which ultimately deviates from candidate expectation and makes the process just less than ideal. So moving on, so diving into technical recruiting strategies. Now, everybody in Silicon Valley knows how hard it is to find engineers. I think that it's something that everybody has experienced of, just how hard it is to get the right talent in. And so I'm sure a lot of you guys are not going to be surprised when I say driving referrals is a big thing on what we do. Now, 50% of our hires last year came from referrals. Especially at a small company, you have the engineers that really understand what the culture looks like, what the needs of the team are. And so when we are driving referrals, we basically sit down and we ask the engineers to give us their top leads and the people that they would want to recruit. But aside from that, we also sit down and comb through their LinkedIn profiles to capture people that maybe they haven't thought of off the top of their head. And we create a matrix. And so essentially, we'll add a bunch of candidates in there, and then it's really a matter of being incredibly organized and following up on that. And this is something that Greenhouse has enabled us to do really well. You can do a massive spreadsheet upload, so once you create all these leads, you upload them into Greenhouse, and then something that I use religiously is the follow-up tool. And it just makes sure that I never forget to reach out to somebody or follow up in 3 months, 6 months, a year out. And then again, getting the engineers involved on a larger basis and really getting the individual contributing engineers involved, getting the leadership involved, and in some cases even tying recruiting to their performance. So it might be something like, they have to spend 10 to 15% of their time each week to recruiting activity, and whatever that means for your company. And just really helping them understand that it's their responsibility to build out their teams, and they are absolutely going to know the needs on their team, and making sure that they understand that it's their responsibility. Now, leveraging your users. So this is another thing that I think we definitely took from Airbnb. Airbnb has a very unique culture, and I think they're very passionate about finding candidates and employees that are extremely passionate about what they're doing. And so they looked to their users to try and find people that would be passionate about the product that could come and work with them. So likewise with Coinbase, we look at our users. So you may be familiar with the Coinbase API, but essentially we encourage engineers to develop and build on top of the Coinbase platform. And what that means is that we find users who are already familiar with our API, they're already interested and passionate about Bitcoin, and we can get a good sense of their technical skill. And it could be, individual engineers that are working with it, or it could be a team of engineers that have built out some cool app, and they might be open to potentially being acquired. So just, important to look back at your users and figure out creative ways to leverage that demographic. Also leveraging the library. So our engineers use a variety of different libraries every day, and something we've done is we've gone into GitHub and looked at the libraries we're using and then identified the top contributors for these libraries and cross-referencing them and seeing if they have the right experience, and then reaching out and starting the conversation. Again, they're going to be familiar with your product, they're going to be familiar with the technology, and they're much more likely to open that conversation. And then lastly, I'll just highlight, the importance of recognizing all of this work that the engineers are doing on the referral side. And as you probably all know, the life cycle of recruiting an engineer is not short, and it can be 6 months, a year, sometimes longer. And so you're asking engineers to really develop these relationships and maintain them over a long period of time. And you're asking them to be kind of on with recruiting all the time, whether it's meeting somebody at a meetup, or maybe they're at a party, or perhaps they're at Burning Man. We know a lot of engineers go to Burning Man, and so they could develop these relationships, and then they have to constantly keep recruiting on the mind. And so it's important to recognize that when they really devote a lot of time and energy to recruiting great people into the company, that we recognize their efforts. So moving on, a couple of things that Coinbase does that to attract top talent. Now, one of the things is actually leveraging Reddit. So with Bitcoin, I think up until fairly recently, it's been a pretty esoteric topic. Most people think of Bitcoin and they think of a great way to launder money or perhaps buy drugs on Silk Road. That's at least what it used to be back in 2013. And so trying to find people who understood what Bitcoin was and understood the power of the technology was fairly difficult. And so a great place that we looked to really find the community behind Bitcoin was on Reddit. Now, we're back in 2013 and 2014, we were really building up the customer operations team aggressively. And they're essentially a very technical team of people who understand the blockchain, understand Bitcoin as a technology, and are very passionate about it, but also have the customer service skills to deal with people every day. And so we appealed to the Reddit community, and obviously it's a fairly tough way. You have to really sift through a lot of volume to try to get the right people, because there's honestly a lot of crazies on Reddit. But what we did is we leveraged HackerRank, and it allowed us to post a test, and we asked people to take this test, and if they got a certain score and they submitted their resume, they would be guaranteed an interview with us. And admittedly, this was a ton of work. It took a lot of sifting through, but it enabled us to have a large top of funnel and sift through it and essentially find a really solid group of core people that we started our customer operations team with. And then as Bitcoin has become more mainstream and people, more engineers know about it, it's gotten a little easier to recruit for this team. But I think it's one really creative way that we've leveraged just a creative solution that we've come up with to find talent. And then another thing is really, really getting your engineering leadership involved. We have, there's a couple of our engineering leaders that are very comfortable speaking, and it's, getting them out in front of people, having them develop their relationships in the community. Engineers want to work with other great engineers. They want to work with people who inspire them and who they admire, who, they would love to sit down and learn from. And so if you have a really amazing engineer, get them out there, start marketing them. People will see them and want to come and work with them. A good example, I'll just walk through a few. In the upper left here, you have Rob Widoff. So he's our director of infrastructure, and he has been tirelessly, getting out there. He speaks at security conferences. He goes abroad and speaks at different conferences internationally. He goes to meetups. He is all over the place. And we've actually hired some senior level talent through people who saw him speak. They got a chance to listen to what type of really interesting technology, what type of challenges we're dealing with, and realized that he was just this awesome guy that they would love to work with, and they started a conversation which ultimately resulted in a hire for us. Another is on the upper right, kind of in the center. That's Charlie Lee, who is actually he's a celebrity in the cryptocurrency space. He's the founder of Litecoin, and I was actually in Vegas with this guy for Money 2020, and people literally come up to him and they worship this guy. So really getting him out into the public is really important, and making sure that people are aware. Charlie Lee works at Coinbase, and he's somebody that you could collaborate with. He could potentially be your manager, and would you want to learn from somebody like this? Now, admittedly, not every engineer wants to speak in front of a crowd of 500 people. Most of them don't. And so there's other opportunities for engineers just to get out there and really get involved. So the three photos on the bottom are a few examples of some of our engineers, including Brian, our founder, helping out at an organization or an event called Rails Girls, which basically teaches women how to code in Ruby on Rails. And it allows them to network with maybe other engineers that have a philanthropic passion and want to get involved with the community. But also it could be a great opportunity to meet other female engineers that are out there and are interested in helping get more women into the engineering space. So point is, just get your engineers out there and involved and public-facing in whatever way that they're comfortable with, and I think that it definitely cannot hurt. So moving on, again, kind of circling back to candidate experience, which I've touched on a couple of times. Again, there are so many amazing companies out there. I'm sure all of you guys work for incredible companies that you're passionate about, and that's obvious why you joined them. And so, if you have a candidate who has two identical opportunities with companies that they're equally passionate about, if they get an amazing experience with one of those opportunities, it will make a difference. I'm sure you've all had candidates who've told you that their recruiting process was exceptional, or in some cases maybe not. And so just a few things that we focus on to really make sure that the candidate experience is great is just simple being on time. Again, I think this is often driven from the founders and from the top, but making sure that if you tell somebody that they're going to be in and out of their interviews by 12, that it doesn't run over to 12:45, because sometimes going back to work and having to explain that is really tough. Another thing is just that 5-minute sync in between interviews. It's really simple, but it has made a world of difference for us, and just scheduling a short period of time and really empowering our engineers to, asking them to communicate what question they've asked, making sure you don't get any duplicate interview questions being asked, and then also if they didn't get a solid read on something, quickly telling the next interviewer to push in on whatever that might be, so you don't have to go back and do another phone screen at the end of the process. Makes a huge difference. Because we do the work trial process, really making sure that we have a project leader who is designated that the candidate can go to, so if they have questions, they know exactly who they can reach out to with questions. And then on more of a casual basis, assigning them buddies. Coming into a work trial process can be a little intimidating, and they don't know anybody. And so by having go-to engineers that they can reach out to and speak with or ask questions or just even have lunch or coffee with, it makes the process that much smoother. And overall, it just makes everything better. And then also just providing interview-focused areas. This is kind of a no-brainer. I think it's, nothing about what I'm saying is rocket science, but it's one of those things I think you can really focus on that does make a difference. So an example is if you have a senior candidate coming in and they accidentally get asked a bunch of CS fundamental coding questions, they're probably going to be a little bit annoyed. So just taking the time to really understand what the candidate's interests are, their background, their experience level, and then prepping your team so that if it is somebody with 16 plus years, they're being asked architectural questions or leadership questions, just ensures that everything flows and they don't get that hiccup that, kind of sticks with them. So, that's basically it. I think what I'd like to wrap up with is just, think through your process and think through your company. And I really encourage you to think about what you could do in your process to set yourself apart so that candidates do walk away with an amazing experience and really feeling like they have just that they walk away with an amazing experience. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. I see that there's quite a few that have come through here. And if anybody wants my contact information to talk through things later, I'm happy to give that as well. So overall, thank you so much for your time and listening to what I have to say, and I'll open it up for questions now.
Thank you, Aurora. So we have a bunch coming in right now. Let's start with this one. Can you explain what you mean by a 5-minute think?
Yeah, sure. So I'm thinking I might have covered that again because I know I brought it up a couple of times. But basically, we ask our engineers to, in between interviews, they grab the next interviewer and they chat for 5 minutes to make sure that they're not asking repeat questions. This happened because, early on we had an interviewer that was asked the same coding question a couple of times, and it just makes you look like you don't know what you're doing. And so making sure that you communicate that, and also, like I said, if you ask a question and let's say you didn't get a solid read on culture, or you didn't get a solid read on their ability, on their product sense or their architectural skills, making sure the next interviewer knows that and they can dive into that a little bit more so that at the end of the on-site you walk away from that and you have a holistic idea of the candidate's strengths, weaknesses, and you don't have to ask them to come back and do that additional phone screen because you didn't quite get a solid enough read on X, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. So one person asked, did I get this right? Everybody does a 1-week work trial? Wow, that's a huge investment from the candidate. Have you had any pushback on this?
Absolutely, all the time. And, admittedly, as we scale, a week is challenging. When I first joined, the company was significantly smaller, and the importance of finding somebody who is extremely passionate about Bitcoin was really important. So in a way, the 1-week work trial was a bit self-selecting. But to your point, very good point, it's hard, it's expensive, and it's time consuming. And so as we've grown, we get creative. So obviously with a VP of Finance candidate, they're busy, they're not going to have time to take a week off. And so what I've done is I've just gotten creative to shorten it and come up with a project that'll allow them to come in for maybe just one day. Or in some cases, if it's like a senior level engineering candidate, we may have them come in and work with us for a day and then kind of take some work away that they can develop a plan or whatever it might be, and then come back and present to us later. So it's really a matter of just understanding what the candidate needs and getting creative with something that works for everybody.
And what happens if someone refuses to do the work trial? Have you had that happen before?
Yes, we have. And most of the time we will get creative and so that, we're able to get them in for even half a day. Most of the time, if somebody absolutely refuses to do the work trial, in a way it is kind of a self-selecting thing, as I mentioned before. As we scale, obviously, things will probably have to change. But right now, the importance of having somebody who's extremely passionate about what we're doing is absolutely key, because it's a tough space to be in, and you have to be passionate beyond just the role. You have to be passionate about the space and really believe that this is the future. And so if somebody does absolutely refuse to do the work trial, at this point it's just an indication that they're probably not the right fit for the company right now.
That makes sense. How often do you find candidates actually reach out to work buddies? Has it driven any metrics for you on Glassdoor or other review sites?
Sorry, can you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. How often do you find candidates actually reach out to work buddies? Has it driven any metrics for you on Glassdoor or other review sites?
So to work, I'm assuming you're talking about the engineering work buddies during the work trial, and that's more so throughout the process of the work trial to make sure that they have somebody who they can go to if they have basic questions about setting up their coding environment, or just small things that it's just easier if they have a touch point. So it's less of, and I'm sure that some of that contributes to the experience and reviews that might be written on Glassdoor. I think overall, the more smooth the experience and the better you can guarantee that the candidate has everything that they need to be set up for success, I think the better the process is going to go. I hope I answered that question. I'm not exactly sure if I did.
Yes, thank you, Aurora. How about this one? Do you keep feedback anonymous among interviewers, or do they share thoughts during the 5-minute sync up? Is that a concern?
So yeah, we do keep feedback private. What we ask people to do is specifically give an indication if they didn't get a strong enough signal one way or the other, because yes, I think if you share all feedback, it definitely compromises the interviewing process. So it's really just, if they need more information in one specific area, that's what we have them push on.
And then how about referrals? How do you continue to drive such high referrals month after month?
It's a lot of work. I think it takes, it's a holistic question. It's everything from the recruiters sitting down with the engineers and tapping their networks. And admittedly, you only have so many engineers. You can only tap their networks so much, right? And as I mentioned before, the process of bringing engineers in can take 6 months to a year, because timing is a big factor, as well as just stage of the company. And so, it's really leveraging that, our tools, and making sure that we're extremely diligent and organized with following up on referrals, and leveraging the follow-up tool with Greenhouse has been extremely valuable on that front. But also, I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting a few of your senior engineers highly involved and integral in the recruiting process. We have a few that champion recruiting, and they're not only active on their own networks out there, but they personally want to build an exceptional company with people that they want to work with, and so they're out there and they are, at meetups, they're reaching out to people that they know, friends of friends. It's kind of always on their mind. And so obviously this requires engineers that are extremely passionate about recruiting and building an exceptional company. And something that you could potentially do, if maybe that's just not there, or if you haven't really been able to tap into that, is tying it to their performance. I know that in some cases with leadership, you have them, it's part of what we use is OKRs. And so we tie that into, as a leader, an engineering manager on the team, you have to devote a certain amount of time to recruiting activity. And so I think that's one way that you can target it. But it's tough. It requires endless work, and it never stops. So hopefully that is an adequate answer for you. Oh, is everybody still there? I don't hear anything.
Oh, yes. We have another question regarding referral bonuses. Other than money and vacation time. Is there anything else you can suggest as a referral bonus?
Other than money and vacation time, is that what they said?
Yeah, vacation and money, other than those two.
For a referral bonus, I mean, I've seen all kinds of interesting, creative ways. I would say leveraging your product for, leveraging unique things about your product. I know that, for example, with, I would say if you have a product like Airbnb, I'm using this just because it's near and dear to my heart and I know a lot about the company, but, offering credit to go and leverage the product to go someplace. I know for sure that would work with the engineers there, given they're all avid travelers and love using the product. And I think with Coinbase, this isn't something that we do, but I would definitely say that it would be a valuable thing is, Bitcoin and giving people Bitcoin or, right now what we're doing is basically just, the referral bonus and, really recognizing people that are actively involved in the recruiting process. But I'd have to think about that one. If you want to follow up with me on that one later, I'm happy to get back to you.
I've heard too in the past where people have gone and made their referral bonuses an actual company-wide movement. So they would go and have a company-wide meeting and bring people up that have done referrals. That way it's just advocating what the referral process is and giving recognition to their employees. So that was another thing that I've seen in the past as well. And then another question, Aurora, you talked about really getting your engineers through those leadership opportunities. How do you help your engineers personally with thought leadership? Do you sign them up for events? Do you give them suggestions? And for those that might be a little bit shy, how do you really get them out there?
That is a great question, something that's been top of mind for me a lot. So one example with our director of infrastructure, he's busy. And so actually what I did is I reached out to my network of people who are in the security community, and because he's helping us to recruit for our director of security as well. And I basically did a research project, and I found all the top events, meetups, any type of conference that anybody could go to, and I put together a kind of synopsis of who they targeted, what type of conference, when they were, the prices, and all of that. And I essentially kind of gave that to him, and I said, all right, what do you think? What would you like to do? And then I helped him to set that up, and then he, got out there and he would attend what he could. So that's one thing you can do if you have an engineer that is particularly comfortable speaking in front of people. But I think other things you can do is conferences is just one way that you can develop a relationship or a reputation as an engineer. Stack Overflow, GitHub, Quora, these are all really great resources where I think engineers can answer technical questions, or even Twitter. There's a lot of engineers that that are seen as thought leaders in that space, and they don't have to speak in front of people. If you go into GitHub and you find that somebody has tons of followers, people are using the technology that they've built out, and they're actively contributing to repositories and different technology, that's going to turn heads in the engineering community. And I think really encouraging your engineers to develop their reputation on some of these forums is a great way to get the word out without them having to speak in front of a large group of people.
That's really helpful. How about, has anyone submitted a resume that seemed like a complete mismatch, but then using your strategies, they ended up being a great fit that you hired? Has that happened in your experience?
Yes, all the time, especially in this space, because being super passionate about the Bitcoin space is extremely important. So I had somebody who apply. This is actually not an engineering position, so I don't know if you want to hear it anymore, but I'll give you the example anyway. I had somebody apply for an investigator, a compliance analyst position, and just wasn't the right fit. But I remember speaking to this person on the phone, and I saw her cover letter was outstanding. She was obviously incredibly passionate about the space and knew a ton about Bitcoin, had written her thesis on Bitcoin, and I just was really impressed because that shows a lot of passion. And so I set a follow-up in Greenhouse, and I kept following back up with her over the next few months, and eventually there was a role that kind of sort of fit, and then I pitched it to her, and she was interested, and she ended up getting hired. So that's one example. Now, on leveraging more of like an engineering type of position, it also happens. I think, when we were very small, sometimes having somebody who could be extremely flexible and pivot to work on everything was really important. And finding somebody who maybe was more specific in one area wasn't, we couldn't do it yet because we didn't have the bandwidth. But I think as we scaled and as we got a little bit bigger, we were able to hire some of these people who maybe took the HackerRank test on Reddit the first time around, and they just didn't quite make the bar for the initial core team. But then once we had more people to support them, we could take on somebody who needed maybe a little bit more support, but had the basic technical chops to hack it.
That's really helpful. And based on your guidelines, what do you really hire with? One person is asking, do you hire for attitude, train for skills, or is it the other way around?
I think they're both equally important. I think if you hire somebody who has the right skill set and they're like the best engineer in the world, but they have a terrible attitude and nobody wants to work with them, I don't think they're the right hire. And honestly, we've actually passed some people like that who technically would have just been a rock star, but if nobody wants to collaborate with them, if they don't have the right mentality to, be receptive to other people's ideas, it's just going to be poisonous to an environment. And so I think, hiring for one of the big things that we look for is humility when we're hiring people, and we want to find engineers who are really solid, but also are open to accepting ideas of others and don't run people over. And that's one of those things that at Coinbase, at Airbnb, every place I've worked, it's a dilemma that you run up against is finding that technical rock star who just nobody really likes. And it's honestly one of those cases when sometimes you need help so desperately and you want to hire them because they would move mountains, but at the end of the day, it's not worth doing that because you'll compromise your culture.
And this question isn't really based on your engineers, but rather the recruiting team, either for a startup or a recruiting team that has been at the company for 10 years. How do you keep your recruiting team engaged and make sure that they are on top of industry trends? Do you do meetings? Do you meet with everyone once a week? How do you stay on top of those?
Yeah, that's a good question because I've honestly never scaled a team to 10 years out. But I honestly think that it just comes down to communication. I did experience this. Right now there's just 3 of us. But I did experience this at Airbnb where, I started and the company was pretty small. And as we scaled, I left when the company was around 900 people. And I think it just comes down to communication and making sure you have really solid communication skills. So to your point, whoever asked the question, I think having meetings is important for communication, but you want to make sure that they're really active meetings. They're not just meetings for the sake of meetings and empowering people. I think that for me, when I was, leading a team at Airbnb, the number one way to keep your employees engaged was to empower them and make them feel that they had ownership over whatever they were doing, that they were making a difference. And so really taking the time to, making sure that one person isn't managing too many people to where they can't give them adequate attention, but sitting down with their team and understanding what makes them tick, what motivates them, what's going to really engage them, and really solid leadership, I think, is the best answer that I can give to that. And somebody who really genuinely cares about coaching and building out a team and mentoring a team as well. Hopefully that answers your question, but you can follow up with me after if it didn't.
That's great. Thank you. How important is it, or has it been, for your recruiting to have a strong presence on social sites like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Facebook? Are some more important than others? How do you decide that? And how do you continue to strengthen those sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. One I think I ask myself at least once a week because there's always different tools that people are reaching out to me with. And I think depending on your goals and what you're trying to recruit for and your budget, it's a matter of balancing all of those. So one product specifically that I've spent a lot of time with considering is Muse because I do think that they have an interesting product and I think that they do a great job of developing good recruiting brand. But at the end of the day, you want to look at who who's the audience that's going to see that profile, and what's the return going to be on how much money you have to spend on signing up for these different tools, because it gets expensive if you add it all up. And so with Glassdoor, I think that's a really great way to, the basic profile is free, and you can build it out, you can add photos, you can really spend some time there, and I think it's, some people use it, and I think it's just a free way to gain some solid social media points. On LinkedIn, I do think it's important to have a presence and build out your profile there. You want to make sure that you're consistent, but what we often think about when we're looking at what tools to invest in, how much money do you spend on postings, what if, do you invest in a tool like Muse, is really just what are you trying to hire for? And right now we're a startup company, we don't have a ton of money to throw at this stuff. If you're a bigger company that has a bigger budget, sure, definitely do it. I think you want to measure your results. But for us, we're hiring for engineers. The majority of the engineering talent that we're looking for is Bitcoin-obsessed specific engineers that probably aren't going to hang out a ton on LinkedIn, and they're probably not going to hang out much on Muse, just because it's the nature of the beast. They're not going to be looking for jobs. And so because of that demographic, we chose not to invest in that right now because we're not hiring aggressively on the marketing or sales front. And then if you are hiring on customer service, marketing, sales, those types of roles are going to be more active on those different platforms, and I think it'll probably be you'll get a better return for your investment.
That's so helpful. Thank you. And as you're building your teams, how do you evaluate that the hiring bar you set is the right one? Is it always a trade between hiring a small number of quite experienced and costly engineers, or hiring a larger number of less experienced ones, or somehow balancing this?
Oh, good question. It sounds like the person who asked this question kind of knows the answer, but it's a balance, right? I think that it's constant communication and, connecting with the hiring managers and the founders to understand what are the company goals, if you have specific projects, does that project have enough resources to where they can, get their job done with the right amount of time? And, what does that balance of senior to junior engineers look like? I think it's always going to be harder to hire more senior level engineers, and whenever you can, you should do it because they're hard to find. But it is a balance. It's a tough one to answer in just a short period of time. But I think that if I could just really, put it back to one thing, it's communication on how things are going, just a status check on, how are things going on certain projects? Do we have enough support with these different projects to get things done fast enough and push out a great product? And if the answer is no, then you really need to identify your weak points and staff up in those areas.
And for those that might not be a technical person, how do you approach engineers? How do you convince them and make them excited to work for your company when a lot of them are focused on technologies? What advice would you have to that person?
For like a recruiter who's not technical? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, just as a non-technical recruiter who's trying to approach engineers and convince them to work.
Honestly, it's get smart on technical terms and just understand more about what they do. I think a big mistake that people will make is reaching out or using keywords or kind of buzzwords, but really not understanding what's underneath that. And you never want to speak out of your depth. My best advice would be just start learning. Get to know as much as you can about engineering. Talk to engineers. Ask them to break down different pieces of technology or different languages to you, and really learn so that you understand the basics and you understand kind of what you don't know as well. Because an engineer is going to respect you if you understand, if you can speak up to a certain point, but then you know when to kind of back off and what you don't know and when you're out of your depth. Something that I really enjoy doing is when I'm trying to hire for a specific team, sit down with the engineers that are on that team and understand what are your challenges, what are you looking for, what's cool about this product, what would an engineer be excited about, and why, like when I reach out, what's going to get them, what's going to turn their head. Just really leverage your engineers that are at the company and help them to teach you how to reach out to the engineers better.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, so let's just wrap up with a few more questions. We have another one here. Great talk, Aurora. You mentioned that recruiting matters when it comes to an engineer's performance. How does this play out? Does management defer to recruiting to rate this person on their referrals, recs, etc.?
So I think that it ends up being, actually, if you can ask that question one more time, I want to make sure I get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that recruiting matters when it comes to engineers' performance. How does this play out? Does management defer to recruiting to rate this person on referrals, recs, etc.?
Yeah. To be honest with you, it's a little, I think it really just comes down to emphasizing the importance for the engineer. And so if it's something that they are going to, we drive our own KPIs, so they're not something that's imposed on you. So basically, as an employee, you sit down and you decide, how do you want to be measured? What do you want to accomplish? And so it's, some of the engineers that decide, I'm really passionate about this. I want to make sure that, I am devoting at least 20% of my time every single quarter to recruiting. And it plays out is that one of our engineers specifically will take 2 days out of every week and just devote it to interviewing, phone screens, driving that. So we don't necessarily measure him on that right now. I don't think we've had to yet. As you scale and you become a much bigger company, then it could be something that needs to be more structured, and that you have X amount of time and it's tied in, and you have ways of measuring that and reporting back. But at this point, because of our size and just the nature of the way that our KPIs work, it doesn't really, we haven't had anything formal set in place.
And just as a basic overview on how you're organizing your recruiting team, how is it organized? How many people do you have? And do you have them specialized in any way? And you can, they say you can address this broadly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we, right now at Coinbase, we're fairly small. So there's only 3 of us, and basically we have Barry, who's our director of recruiting, and then I'm recruiting manager, and we have Brittany, who's one of our recruiters who joined as well. And, we basically break it off by requisitions. And so, Barry will focus on, let's just say acquisitions, for example, and then I'll focus on senior level talent that's coming through, and then Brittany might be focusing on general engineers or iOS engineers or whatnot. So right now, because we're so small, it's fairly easy for us to, get each other's back, and there's a lot of crossover, so that no one person is left with a ton of work, and we can shuffle resources quickly if we need to. I'm guessing that this question probably came from somebody who has a little bit of a larger team where it gets a little bit more complicated, and so I can actually refer back to my time at Airbnb, where basically we had a team of people that would focus on specific areas. So you might have somebody who's focusing on referrals that are coming through, and then they own that completely. Others are focusing on Android or iOS, or others might be focusing on security engineers. So it's, it really is broken off by requisition.
Thank you. And then do you have the specific tips for increasing diversity of applicant tracking pool? Ultimately, staff, especially for companies between 50 to 100 people. And I can repeat the question again if you'd like.
Yeah, I think I got it. Honestly, it's just having somebody focusing on it and making sure that's top of mind for somebody. You have to keep a focus on it, otherwise with so much going on and when you're moving so fast, especially with a company of 50 to 100 people, you're doing 1,000 things at one time, all the time. You have to make sure it's something that is, somebody's responsibility that they're measuring day in and day out. Actually, one thing I wanted to circle back on that I realized from the question about how we measure time on the engineering side that's put into their work, we actually do have a follow-up. So at the end of every quarter, every person goes in and they look at their KPIs or their OKRs that they've set for themselves, and they measure themselves against that, and then that gets exposure to not only their hiring manager but also to the entire company. So we're very transparent in that front, and so they have to go back and look to see how did I do against this, and they set their own measurements on if they were able to accomplish it. And so for an engineer who might say, okay, I'm going to devote 20% of my time to recruiting, they go back in and they can see, did I accomplish my goal or not? So essentially you're really being held you're holding yourself responsible for accomplishing your goal, and if it was an unrealistic goal, then you adjust it the next quarter. But in any case, it's very transparent and communicated to the entire company.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, and I just want to take the time. I know we have some withstanding questions, but feel free to reach out to either Tom, myself, or Aurora. And I just want to thank Aurora and Tom for participating in this Hiring Hacks webinar, and for all of you just listening and all of your questions. These have been super, super thoughtful and very much engaging. And I just wish you all such a great day. And please feel to continue this conversation online. All of us will be available. And again, just to remind, for those people that want to review some more bullet points or take this back to their team, we'll have the recorded version up and live and distributed to you by the end of the week. So thank you so much, everyone.